into Ukraine, does that extend beyond the Kharkiv region, including into the Sumy region, where Russian forces have also been targeting Ukraine?
It extends to anywhere that Russian forces are coming across the border from the Russian side to the Ukrainian side to try to take additional Ukrainian areas.
What we're seeing is exact Ukraine becoming the Afghanistan of Europe.
Fleet of Russian warships conducting missile exercises near Cuba, which is just 90 miles off of the Florida coast. So this fleet expected to leave today. In response, though, the U.S. has sent warships to closely monitor this situation.
General Floyd, thank you for agreeing to meet with us today.
Yes, you are most welcome. Giving you a chance to beg and plead for mercy before we destroy your planet is my favorite part of the job. No, please, don't destroy us. We don't deserve it.
But here's a question. Does this show of Russian force so close to our shoreline signal a new era in the Cold War?
Speaking of which, let me tell you what America has done. It has armed a faction of the Ukrainian armed forces that Russia brands as neo-Nazis.
Nailed it.
That was a lucky guess, but there are way more than just two genders.
Fascinating. We've been probing humans for years, and we've only discovered there are two. How many genders are there?
172. It's hard to know, really. It's changing all the time. So,
are you sure this is okay, Mom? Well, let him out in the morning.
We always tell the Ukrainians, go smash the Russians wherever you can. And a couple of weeks ago, the Ukrainians hit the radar of Russia's anti-nuclear war early warning system. Are you kidding? Are you kidding? You want to really end the world by destabilizing the early warning system against a nuclear attack of a nuclear superpower? But they...
Blindspot 115. Ukraine, Europe's Afghanistan. NATO shoots at Russia. Nuclear war warnings while the US grows a mega debt bomb. So today we are looking at an alien representative who happened to visit the White House at the same time as the LGBTQ community representative group and the confusion that stemmed from that. But we're not going to cover that first. We'll keep it to last. And if there's no time, maybe we'll cut it out. But now that we've said it, we may have to keep it in. But nevertheless, we also look at how the United States quietly lifts its sanctions on the Nazi Azov brigade of Ukraine. Busy times for Russian naval forces in Cuba and Egypt in the last week or two. While on the seas, we see that the Houthi rebels from Yemen have launched their first successful unmanned surface vehicle strike on a vessel in the Red Sea. While Israel, as it's committing its genocide in Gaza, IDF, Israeli Defense Force generals, have apparently approved battle plans for an invasion of Lebanon to take out Hezbollah. And then the United States is building a mega debt bomb in the midst of it all.
So, what are these genders and how do they function?
Sometimes single little reports highlight major history and problems that we face in the world. Now, we see that quietly the United States lifted sanctions on the Nazi Azov brigade in Ukraine. They are under UN sanctions or unilateral US sanctions. I'm not exactly sure, but some form of sanction. Now, not only were these sanctions lifted, but we need to remember that in the last 2 to 3 weeks, we covered, for example, Boris Johnson in the UK meeting with Azov Nazi brigade representatives in London. He cheered them on and basically said efforts to bomb Russian territory from inside Ukraine using British or NATO weapons is on. Bring it on. They want it. They want to shoot Russia from there, and they want to write messages on the NATO supplied missiles to send the message, we want to destroy Russia. That's the point they're making. James Cameron, also UK, recently, we covered it in Blindspot, doing exactly the same. But now, this lifting of sanctions on the Azov brigade is either an act of desperation or an acknowledgement. Sorry, NATO, you're going to have to deploy the Nazi iron brigades now that the Ukrainian front lines are collapsing in just about all directions. Let's see what WION has to say on an interesting report on this development.
Speaking of which, let me tell you what America has done. It has armed a faction of the Ukrainian armed forces that Russia brands as neo-Nazis. The US has lifted weapon sanctions that were imposed on the Azov Brigade. This is a unit of the Ukrainian military with quite a checkered history. The Azov Brigade started off as a militia that was absorbed into the Ukrainian National Guard in 2015. This unit is accused of human rights violations by the United Nations, which is why Washington had banned the Azov Brigade from using American arms. But now, as the war escalates, Washington has pulled a swift U-turn. And now, as the war escalates, the US has decided to give the Azov Brigade full access to its cache of weapons. And here is how Russia has reacted to this. Listen to this.
Крайне негативно. Речь идет о ультранационалистах, ультранационалистических вооруженных подразделениях. И, собственно, такая внезапная смена позиции Вашингтона говорит о том, что они ничем не гнушаются в своих попытках подавить Россию. Подавить Россию, да, используя, естественно, Украину и украинский народ в качестве инструмента в своих руках.
When Russia launched the special military operation into Ukraine in February 2022, a lot of people made a joke of one of the stated official objectives of the special military operation is called by the Russian military forces and its military operations the denazification of Ukraine. People thought it's a joke. It is not a joke. The history of the Azov battalion can be traced back to before 2014 as a brutal, bloodthirsty battalion, a militia that ultimately, after the coup in 2014, got absorbed into the formal military structures to proceed to perpetrate extreme acts of barbarity on the Russian residents of the eastern Ukraine that led to the civil war that broke out there. Now, let's leave that there for a moment and proceeding very quickly down the path. On similar vein, in this last week or two, the Russian naval forces, naval vessels, visited Cuba, for example, with a Russian nuclear submarine carrying the hypersonic Zircon missile with it, in a clear message to the United States. We're sorry, we can reach within 90 miles of your shores through uncontested international waters. Our naval capability reaches and knocks on your door. Think Cuban Missile Crisis of the previous century's Cold War. So the message that the Russian Federation is sending, we are here, we are watching, we've got friends in your backyard. Number two, Egypt, in the Eastern Mediterranean, the Russian Navy once again with the Egyptian Navy in naval exercises. Now, naval exercises are part of naval diplomacy. It's actually a part of diplomacy between states. It's a very well-known thing, but it's also very symbolic, because at this time where the Houthis are laying siege to the Red Sea and blocking the Suez Canal, having global shipping rerouted around the southern point of the African continent, it once again illustrates the fact of a majorly shifting balance of forces in the world, and it's even physical in what types of military forces are present doing what in particular regions, formerly unthinkable to a world dominated by a unilateral West. And that's what this whole thing is about. But let's quickly just have two quick clips on the Cuba. And this is actually from a US channel. Interesting how they comment about it. And then the Egypt-Russia naval drills in the Mediterranean.
A fleet of Russian warships conducting missile exercises near Cuba, which is just 90 miles off of the Florida coast. So this fleet expected to leave today. In response, though, the U.S. has sent warships to closely monitor this situation. But here's a question. Does this show of Russian force so close to our shoreline signal a new era in the Cold War? Well, I spoke exclusively with a former lieutenant general and admiral for answers. Russian missiles are fired in what's being touted as a routine training exercise. But this fleet of Russian warships docked in Cuba hasn't been this close to the Florida coast in years.
Welcome to the new Cold War. This is the reality of the day.
Former Lieutenant General Russell Honore says this show of Russian force is also psychological.
I think they're sending a clear message that they're engaged and they got the capacity to come to our shoreline with missiles and ships that can fire on the United States proper with very little warning. And that's the scary part, because the warning time can be very short.
How quickly could it get to our shores?
Matter of minutes.
Okay, so maybe we need to drive the point home a bit more clearly. In the WION report and the CBS report on the visit by the Russian nuclear submarine to Cuba with its attending vessels with it in a group moving across the planet, let's remember that happens in nearly the same week, I would think, within the last 7 days maximum, or maybe more. But in that period, also the United States then finally, by mouth of one of its senior spokespeople, saying we will allow Ukraine to use long-range United States provided munitions to strike targets of troops moving inside Russian territory aiming to attack Ukraine. That can mean anything. That can mean the United States can actually hit a military facility in Vladivostok from Alaska because they're claiming they're going to be going on the Trans-Siberian Railroad all the way through Moscow, eventually into Ukraine to fight NATO.
To allow Ukraine to fire American weapons just over the border into Russia at Russian forces that are about to attack into Ukraine. Does that extend beyond the Kharkiv region, including into the Sumy region, where Russian forces have also been targeting Ukraine?
It extends to anywhere that Russian forces are coming across the border from the Russian side to the Ukrainian side to try to take additional Ukrainian territory.
So that could include
That's happened in Kharkiv. We've seen initial indications that Russia has made exploratory moves across in Sumy, and so it would apply there as well. This is not about geography, it's about common sense. If Russia is attacking or about to attack from its territory into Ukraine, it only makes sense to allow Ukraine to hit back against the forces that are hitting it from across the border.
Now, while other regions of the world are seriously going up in flames, it would seem, if we watch it from this point of view, now the Houthis from Yemen apparently may have launched their first successful unmanned surface vehicle attack on a commodity carrying vessel in the Red Sea region there that they've been besieging in their war that we covered in Blindspot 1994. The Houthis launched a war in solidarity with the Palestinians, not just in Gaza, but in solidarity with the Palestinians against the Israeli Defense Force, and by implication the United States and anybody else who opposes the axis of resistance. Remember, the axis of resistance in the Middle East is a very powerful network, make no mistake. Now, that story of this successful unmanned surface vehicle, we're not going to spend too much time, but we know they have taken down US Predator drones. They have successfully shot surface to sea missiles, surface to air. They've got drone capability second to none. They've got other deployment capabilities, which makes them, as a non-state actor, a lethal force that's shutting down the Red Sea and forcing global shipping around the Cape of Good Hope, among other places. So we see some post on X showing actually photos of this vessel apparently appearing on the sea by very confused members on the ship, some of them even armed, as you can see. And then an image also of Zero Hedge of clearly it's not just listing, but it's heading for the bottom. And then as all of that happens, we have Israel's top generals approve battle plans for a Lebanon offensive, meaning there's plans cooked up, ready to come out of the oven for land invasion and other forms of interference into Lebanon, because Hezbollah, like the Yemeni Houthis, been fighting in solidarity with the Palestinians against Israel. So now, what's so ironic about all of this, from the October 7th event, everybody has been saying, no, but we don't want a regional escalation. Hello? We've already had the Islamic Republic of Iran for the first time in history deploy a massive capability of drones and satellite-guided missile systems to attack Israel and defeat its Iron Dome within the last few months, and people are still saying, no, but we don't want regional escalation. Forget about it. It's already there. Anyway, that's the point of this little quick comment on what's happening in that part of the world. So where's all of this leading us? We get to the story of the US creating a mega debt bomb. Now, John Stossel, he's a commentator. If you want to hear similar comments like this on United States debt, go and find Martin Armstrong. It's called ArmstrongEconomics.com. You can find him. Look at his interviews, read his material. But if anybody, it's just a comment that I found, or we found on John Stossel, commenting on this crisis of United States escalating debt. Now we must remember that the global wars, the global military positioning, the strategic positioning, the banking industry, the financial systems, the SWIFT, etc., that we've covered before in Blindspot are all part of a macro organism that is the United States' presence in the global economy. Now, why do we say that? That inside that system, when we talk about de-dollarization, something we've covered extensively on Blindspot before, there's not just political factors driving de-dollarization, like the political factor of the Russian Federation being the target of economic warfare, being taken out of SWIFT post-2022 special military operation, and then having to establish alternative platforms like we have covered in Blindspot 113, when we looked at, and as very recently, we looked at what we called tensions on Cold War 2.0 economic front lines intensifying, looking at, for example, in certain Western capitals, they are already considering third-party sanctions on countries or entities that may use the Russian system that is an alternative to SWIFT. Just an interesting example. But now, the US mega debt bomb, it's not just political factors driving people out of the US dollar, it's also the understanding that the United States debt addiction is unsustainable, and that the United States dollar is losing value, number one. There's inflation, number two. Number three, the US bonds cannot be cashed out for what they are valued for over 5, 10 or 15 years any longer. And on top of that, they're just creating more and more debt. So let's just quickly see what John Stossel, just a few comments that he makes on this crisis unfolding, which is actually the bigger and more dangerous crisis that may also explain a lot of the warmongering, because war sometimes makes money just for some people.
My videos may be tired of my complaints about America's massive debt, but our government's now so deep in debt that taxpayers have to spend $1 trillion a year just on the interest. That's more than all our spending on defense. This will cripple our future. We're on an unsustainable path. Yet most politicians won't even address it. Many brag about spending more.
We're going to spend $1.2 trillion over 10 years.
His opponent bragged about what he spent.
$738 billion. That's with a B.
On the rare occasions when they do acknowledge the debt, they make things up.
I don't know if you noticed, but deficits seem to be coming down.
We literally cut the federal debt in half.
No, that's just not true. Both increased the debt by record amounts, and the increases continue. Our debt's now rising by $1 trillion every 100 days. We're much deeper in debt than we were just 4 years ago when I
explained to the public what is really a 30-year project to expand our pieces on the board all over the former Soviet Union. No one's explained Project Ukraine. No one has explained to the public that Zbigniew Brzezinski, by the way, whom I liked and thought was really a smart guy, how he laid out in 1997 the strategy. Clearly, it's in a paper called The Strategy for Eurasia in Foreign Affairs magazine. He says by 2005 to 2010, we'll be inviting Ukraine to join NATO. This was a long-term plan. It's backfired. It's gone terribly wrong. And you asked me, what's the truth about Ukraine? The truth is that Ukrainians are dying or being seriously wounded at a rate of typically more than 1,000 per day right now. Sometimes even twice that number. There's an incredible destruction of Ukrainian society underway right now. And the few people that are in charge of this policy, whether it's Zelensky, I don't know if he's in charge, people say he'd be killed if he tried anything else, but the few people that are in charge on the Ukrainian side and the very few people that are in charge on the American side, because they're running this whole war, are really fighting to the last Ukrainian. Right? This is what's actually happening. It's terrifying. This is not a democratically elected government in Ukraine. This is a government of martial law that has overstayed its constitutional limit. There is no internal constraint. People are being shot at the rivers, the border with Romania, for example, if they try to swim across the river to avoid conscription. People are being dragged off the streets right now because they're being sent to the front lines with no training, essentially. Maybe they're told how to handle a gun and how to load it, but then they're sent off to the front lines and they're dying in huge numbers right now. And this is American policy. This is our policy. This is supposedly in the defense of freedom. This isn't in the defense of freedom. This is in the quest to put our peace on the board in this game of risk that we're playing. Now, it's all turning extraordinarily dangerous. The Ukrainian regime is very radicalized. It is fighting for its survival as a regime and killing a lot of its citizens in the process, but it's doing things that are extraordinarily dangerous, sometimes at the provocation. The British, for example, always provoking. They were an empire longer than we've been an empire, and their behavior is even worse, though they have less power now. But they
most welcome. Giving you a chance to beg and plead for mercy before we destroy your planet is my favorite part of the job. No, please, don't destroy us. We don't deserve this.
But they did that at two sites. What we're seeing is exactly Ukraine becoming the Afghanistan of Europe. What do I mean by that? I meant Afghanistan was in war for decades. It was destroyed. Its civil culture destroyed, the economy destroyed, the organization of the state destroyed, the infrastructure destroyed. That's American handiwork. We were there. We were there all that time.
Well, not only do we have the debt bomb being built in the United States, but when you listen to this previous clip, when you listen to what he says, that strikes on two facilities that's part of the Russian nuclear defense system. That is hugely significant. So we cannot underestimate the manner in which the Western leaders are entertaining Azov Nazis. They are lifting sanctions on the metal brigades in the Ukraine, and well, so be it. It seems we are in for it. But now, just on the lighter side of things, and that was the first story we wanted to start off with, but we want to say that it is getting very much over 20 minutes now, our usual kind of ballpark figure where we want to end things off with, but we'll say, okay, this is an extended bit of a funny version. But now, in the last few days, just something that grabbed our attention, a post on X by someone called Jason D. Meister. Putin met with Kim Jong-un today. Biden and Kamala met with members of the LGBTQ community at the White House today. But that then prompted another memory of something that lives on the internet by a person. It's probably not made by him, but I found it on his threads on Odyssey. Somebody who goes by the name, go and find him, Richie from Boston. Outlander, something like that. Richie from Boston. So anyway, so we have this Putin meeting, Kim Jong-un in North Korea, but something else happening in the White House. It just tells you something of what certain world leaders keep themselves busy with in their off time in the office in the White House. Nevertheless, and then we'll go to an alien now. What happened in the White House is that there was now a double booking because they booked a representative of an invading alien species on the same day in the White House, who then saw this LGBTQ community, and he then asked the military representatives. He was negotiating with several in-depth questions about, but are there not just two genders on this planet? So we'll conclude with that. Thank you.
What's up, YouTube? It's Richie from Boston. It has been a while since I put a video up, but like I said in the last video and the video before that, not too much going on, not too much different happening right now other than the agenda pushing forward.
General Floyd, thank you for agreeing to meet with us today.
Yes, you are most welcome. Giving you a chance to beg and plead for mercy before we destroy your planet is my favorite part of the job. No, please! Don't destroy us! We don't deserve this! The looks on their faces. It's a hoot.
Perhaps we should start out by introducing ourselves. I'm Chief of Space Operations, General Foreman, he, him. Undersecretary of State, Angus Miller, he, him.
Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, Amanda Williams, she, her.
And what exactly is a Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer?
It's my job to be a black woman.
Well, good job, then. And what is this he, him, she, her, of which you are all speaking?
Those are our gender pronouns, so you know which gender we identify as.
I appreciate that, but I am pretty good at telling the difference between the two genders. A man, woman. Nailed it.
That was a lucky guess, but there are way more than just two genders.
Fascinating. We've been probing humans for years, and we have only discovered there are two. How many genders are there?
172. It's hard to know, really. It's changing all the time.
So, your species is evolving that rapidly. Remarkable. Perhaps while you are sitting here, you will grow additional limbs or develop the ability to breathe underwater.
No, that's not what we meant.
It's too bad. I breathe underwater. It's a lot of fun. If you threw 20 pennies into a pool, I could dive down and pick them all up without ever once resurfacing. Whoa. What, no applause? So, what are these genders, and how do they function?
Function? I don't understand.
Why, yes. On my planet, the female gender is the giver of life, raising and nurturing our young, preserving our civilization for eons to come, while the males mostly just mow our space lawns and make multiple trips to Space Home Depot.
What you are talking about is sex. Gender is something different.
Exactly. People can identify with genders different than their natal sex, or with none at all.
But why?
It's just the way we feel.
No! It was the way we were born.
Well, of course, a lot of times they don't realize how they were born until someone tells them. Someone like a teacher, social media influencer.
And what exactly are these various genders? You have me very curious.
Well, there's non-binary, which is someone who identifies as both genders.
Doesn't saying identifies both genders imply that there are only two genders?
No, it's... Shut up.
Actually, it's genderqueer. That is the term that refers to people who identify as both genders. You know, like my nephew.
I thought that was gender fluid, like my niece.
No, that shifts around.
No, bigender shifts around, like my stepson.
Well, it can.
Oh, unless you're Native American, in which case it's two-spirit. Like my cousin who got into Harvard because they's 1/16 Native American.
Oh, I understand. On this planet, there are people who are men, and people who are women, and people who are mentally ill, and people who are mentally ill.
I can understand that it's